You have probably struggled to get a couch up a single flight of stairs, two people, one doorway, and somehow it still turns into 20 minutes of shouting and scraped knuckles. Now imagine doing that with a block of stone the size of a small car. Now imagine doing it 2.5 million times. That is the Great Pyramid of Giza. Roughly 2.3 million blocks, averaging 2.5 tons each, some of them pushing 80 tons, assembled into a structure 481 feet tall, using nothing but copper tools, ropes, wood, and human muscle. It was built in around 20 years. No pulleys strong enough to matter. No wheels built for that kind of load. No iron. For a long time, the honest answer to how was nobody fully knows. But the real answer is far stranger than a mystery waiting to be solved. Large parts of it actually have been solved recently with real evidence, and the part that remains unexplained is not the part most people assume. For most of the last 2 centuries, the popular version of the story was slaves, whips, and brute misery. That version is almost entirely wrong, and it has been wrong for a while now. Archaeologist Mark Lanner spent decades excavating a site just south of the pyramids called Hayt el Ghurab, a purpose-built town where the construction crews actually lived. What his team found were bakeries capable of feeding thousands of people a day, evidence of medical care for workers who had broken bones properly set and healed, and cattle remains suggesting a diet good enough to keep a workforce strong for years at a stretch. These were not disposable slaves. They were rotating crews of skilled and unskilled labourers, organised, housed, and fed with the kind of logistics a modern construction firm would recognise. Start with the piece that used to be the biggest question mark. How do you even get the stones there? The pyramid sits on the west bank of the Nile, but its finest limestone came from quarries at Tura, on the opposite side of the river, roughly 15 kilometres away. For centuries, Egyptologists could describe the pyramid down to the inch, but the actual logistics of hauling that much stone that far, on schedule, for 2 decades straight, were mostly guesswork. That changed in 2013. A team led by the French archaeologist Pierre Tallet was excavating a set of sealed caves at Wadi al-Jarf, on the Red Sea coast, when they uncovered papyrus fragments buried under limestone blocks. They turned out to be the oldest inscribed papyri ever found, written nearly 4,500 years ago. Tallet published the full text in 2017. It is now known as the Diary of Mara, after the official who kept it, a man whose job title translates roughly to inspector. Mera was not a poet. He was a project manager. His logbook is a flat, dry record of a work crew's schedule, day by day, for a period during the reign of Khufu himself, the pharaoh the Great Pyramid was built for. And what it describes is not brute force hauling across open desert. It describes a canal network. Mera's crew moved limestone blocks from Tura by boat, along a system of waterways that ran directly to the base of the construction site. The stones were never dragged 15 kilometers by hand, they floated. Does that change how you picture it? It should. The image of thousands of men dragging stone across sand for miles was never quite right. The Egyptians were moving building material the same way you would move something heavy today. Not with more muscle, with better routing. But floating stone to the site only solves part of the problem. At some point, someone still has to drag that block off the boat and across the last stretch of ground to where it is going to sit, and dragging multi-ton stone across sand should be nearly impossible. Dry sand piles up in front of anything you try to pull across it. It should have taken enormous crews just to move one block a few meters. In 2014, a team of physicists at the University of Amsterdam, led by Daniel Bonn, decided to actually test this instead of assuming it. Their work was published in Physical Review Letters, and it was inspired by something hiding in plain sight for thousands of years, a wall painting inside the tomb of Jehuti-Hotep, dating to around 1900 BCE, showing over 170 men hauling a massive statue on a wooden sledge, and right at the front of that sledge, painted clearly, is a single figure pouring water onto the sand. Bond's team measured the actual physics. Dry sand creates a mound in front of a sliding sledge, and that mound is what generates most of the resistance. Add the right amount of water, and the sand grains bind together into a firmer surface, cutting the friction dramatically, in some tests by roughly half. Too little water, and it does nothing. Too much, and the sand turns to mud and grabs the sledge even harder. There is a narrow window of exactly the right dampness, and the Egyptians were already using it, 1,000 years before anyone left a record explaining why it worked. So the block gets quarried, floated down a canal, and dragged across deliberately wetted sand to the base of the pyramid. Every part of that has now been documented, either in a 4,500-year-old logbook or a modern physics lab. This is not ancient mystery anymore. This is engineering that has been reverse engineered, piece by piece, with names attached and papers published. Here is where you would expect the story to end. A mystery solved. Except that is not actually the part of the pyramid that remains unexplained. The unresolved question is not how the stones got to the site. It is what happened once they needed to go up. Getting a 2-ton block across flat ground with wet sand is one problem. Getting an 80-ton granite block quarried 500 miles south in Aswan up to a chamber more than 140 feet above the ground is a completely different one. And on this question, Egyptologists genuinely do not agree. The obvious answer is a ramp, but run the numbers and the obvious answer stops looking obvious. A single straight ramp long enough to reach the top of the pyramid at a workable incline would need to stretch roughly a mile, and building it would take more raw material than the pyramid itself contains. That is not a minor engineering inconvenience. That is a second monument, larger than the first, that would then need to be completely dismantled and hidden well enough that it left almost no trace. A spiral ramp wrapped around the outside solves the material problem, but it would have covered the corners the builders needed exposed to keep the whole structure precisely square as it rose, and surveyors have found no clear physical remains of one. A French architect named Jean-Pierre Houdin proposed a third option, an internal spiral ramp, tunneling up through the pyramid's own body, invisible from the outside because it was never meant to be seen. It is an elegant idea, consistent with some internal anomalies later scans have picked up. It has never been directly confirmed. And then in 2017, the mystery got stranger instead of simpler. A team led by the physicist Kunihiro Morishima at Nagoya University had been placing specialized particle detectors inside and around the Great Pyramid as part of a project called Scan Pyramids. They were tracking muons, high-energy particles constantly raining down from cosmic rays, which pass through solid stone but travel more freely through empty space. By measuring where more muons made it through, Morishima's team could map density differences invisible to any camera or ground scan. What they found, published in the journal Nature, was a void, a hidden cavity above the Grand Gallery, at least 30 meters long, roughly the same cross-section as the gallery itself, sitting inside solid stone where nobody had detected any opening in over 4,000 years. It is the first major internal structure discovered inside the Great Pyramid since the 1800s. Nobody has been inside it. Nobody knows what it was built for. It could be a construction feature, a relief chamber to redistribute weight, or something with a purpose that has not been guessed correctly yet. Sit with that for a second. In the same monument, one question, moving the stones, has been almost completely answered with a papyrus logbook and a physics lab. And another question, sitting less than 200 feet away inside the exact same structure, remains a genuine unresolved void that particle physicists can detect but cannot open. That gap is the real story here, more than either discovery on its own. It is tempting to treat "we figured out the sledges" and "we figured out the pyramid" as the same sentence. They are not. Answering the visible, external, physically testable part of a hard problem does not mean you have answered the part buried deep inside it. Sometimes the harder question was never the one everyone was asking out loud. You have probably done this yourself, with problems that had nothing to do with stone or sand. You figure out the logistics of a hard situation, the schedule, the resources, the surface level mechanics, and it feels like understanding. It looks like understanding from the outside. Everyone around you might even agree that you have it handled, but there can still be a hidden chamber inside the structure you built, something you have not opened yet, something you can only detect indirectly through the way certain feelings pass through you more freely than others should, the way muons pass more easily through empty space than through solid stone. Solving the visible problem does not guarantee you have found the real one. It just means you solved the part that happened to be reachable first. The honest answer is not always "this is fully explained" or "this is a total mystery." Sometimes it is both, in the same structure, at the same time. You can know exactly how something got built, name the researcher, cite the paper, run the physics experiment yourself, all the way up to the exact point where the explanation runs out and a void begins. Knowing where that point is might be the more useful discovery than pretending it does not exist. You have probably struggled to get a couch up a single flight of stairs and thought that was the hard part. Maybe the real difficulty was never getting the thing to the base. Maybe it was always what happens once it has to go up, into the part you still cannot see inside.